me was at sea. My goal since that age of 4 years old was to race around the world. And the moment I crossed that finish line, it was over. And that had led me through my entire life to sail around the world. And at that moment, it was gone. And that was at a time when your life changes forever. I wanted to sail around the world. I didn't want to be someone that was recognised in the street. I didn't want to be someone that was in all the newspapers. It was a part of the job. But it changed my life forever. And 6 months after the finish of that journey, I knew I was going around the world again because my home was at sea. That's where I felt that I could be me. And the second time, I chose not to race around the world, but to try and break a record. To be the fastest person ever to sail solo non-stop around the world. The record, when we built B&Q for that very task, stood at 93 days. And just as we launched her, down in Australia, the record was taken from 92 down to 72 days. And everyone said that will stand for a decade, and it deserved to. Because a French guy took a boat 25% bigger than that one, around a world that was designed to be sailed by 10 people. Not only did he make it, but he took 20 days off the record. So the bar when we set off was high. High because the record was so short, but also high because he'd sailed a much bigger boat. So we had to push so hard. And when we built her, nobody had ever made it solo non-stop around the world in a multi-hull. Because these are dangerous boats. They're lively, they're wet, they go very fast. There's a lot of stress involved, both in the engineering of the boat and also in yourself, because you're sailing so quickly. Things go wrong in seconds. There were 11 guys on this boat, and that flipped in no time. They didn't intend to capsize the boat, obviously, but it still happened. And when you see those figures on the right-hand side of the picture, hanging onto the net, and you see how far down the sea is, it makes you realise you wouldn't want to do that in the Southern Ocean, 2,500 miles away from the nearest town, when the waves are twice the height of this room. That would not be a good idea. But it makes you prepare, and it makes you think, and it makes you practice. And going through experiences such as this was important for me, because I was one of those 5 characters. That took 5 seconds to capsize that boat. And everything was fine. There was no stress, it was windy, but we were sailing beautifully. And then we just tapped something, just hit something on the rudder, the orange thing that steers the boat at the back. And then 5 seconds later we were upside down. And so that around the world was not only an extraordinary experience, but probably spending 3 months of your life with the highest stress levels you could ever imagine. It's a bit like driving a car. You know, if you're doing 20, 30, 40 kilometres an hour, it's not very stressful. Take that to 60, 80, 100, 120, 40, 60, 200. You're gripping the wheel with white knuckles, trying to keep the car on the road. That's just what it's like when you race around the world. You're keeping the boat on the road, and you're keeping the boat sailing as fast as possible, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You tend to sleep more in the day than you do at night, because at night the sailing is harder. You can't see so clearly. You sleep in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minute snatches, occasionally an hour, very rarely 2 hours, and only once in 3 months did I sleep for 3 hours in a row. So it really is broken sleep, because you can only sleep when the weather lets you. Because if the wind is up and down, if the wind is gusty, you cannot switch off. Doesn't matter if it's 5 knots or 50 knots. The stable wind is what allows you to switch off. So you live in a different world. You live in a boat that you manage. Every decision on that boat you take, you look at not only the electricity in the boat, the food in the boat, the equipment you have in the boat, but you look at the weather systems. You look at the water temperature. You look at the iceberg routes. You look at what the wind's doing. You look at what the sea's doing. You look at what the mountains of the earth are doing beneath the sea, because they change the currents and they change what will happen to the waves on the surface. You live as part of this huge system. But on that boat, you manage everything that you have. I took with me 475 litres of diesel, half a tonne, just to power a generator which ran 2 autopilots and a computer. That was for a sailing boat. There was no engine on the boat apart from the generator, just to get around the world. Food, 1 bag for 7 days. Gas, every 7 days, a small gas bottle. That needed to last me 7 days. All you have is freeze-dried food and the smallest, lightest camping gas cooker you can ever imagine. And as you go around the world, you see every bag get less. You see the fuel tank go down. You see the 10-litre header tank fill up and empty. So you can keep that boat on the road. You can keep the boat powering through the water. You can keep the voltage in the batteries to make sure the boat stays the right way up. Because if the battery voltage falls too low, 5 seconds later the boat will be upside down because the autopilot that steers it will just let go. No electricity. And what you develop when you race around the world on a boat like B&Q, in fact any boat, is you realise what finite really means. What you have on that boat is all you have. There is no more. And never in my life had I translated that notion, that understanding of finite, before to anything other than that time at sea. But when I crossed that finish line, successfully having broken the record, I realised that our global economy is no different. We too have finite resources that push our economy, that our economy relies on to run. And I needed to understand more. It was a bit like picking up a stone and seeing something beneath it, and having two choices. You either put that stone back down and carry on with your dream job, which it really was, of racing solo around the world, or you put it to one side and you start to learn more about something you understand nothing about. I had no background in economics, I didn't understand economics, I'd never looked at global resources, but I needed to understand more. I couldn't put that rock back down again and carry on. And so I started to learn, and I began a journey of looking at a slightly different horizon, looking at the global economy, speaking to experts, scientists, speaking to economists, speaking to lecturers, speaking to farmers, speaking to as many people as I could possibly find to try and understand how this massive global system works that is our global economy. How does it function? Where do the resources come from? How many years of these resources are left? I was full of questions. Everything was a question as I went about this new journey of looking towards the future. Well, this photo was taken in a coal-fired power station. We don't have so many of those over here in Sweden, but we have many in the UK. Coal was a huge part of our UK economy. This is in the burner. So this is in the burner that lights with coal dust. It's on fire when it's lit. It's obviously not lit there, or else I wouldn't be here. It goes to 2,000 degrees, and it's 180 feet high, and when it gets hot, it expands by 40 centimetres, just so that it can power the turbines by the steam from the pipes that these guys were fixing. And to stand in something of that scale is extraordinary. To see the scale of what we build to generate electricity, for me, was amazing. To see the engineers, to meet the engineers, to look at the scale, to look at the coal, just to see how things function, fascinated me. And on this journey, coal was a subject which was very close to my heart. It was part of the UK economy for many, many years. And my great-grandfather was a coal miner. And when you see that picture of him, you see a man from another era. Nobody dresses like that now. Nobody has trousers that pull up quite that high right now. It may come back, but it's another age. But yet that's me with him. And they're not his real ears. They're as stocky as he put on for his great-grandchildren. But I was really close to my great-grandfather. I remember him talking about his life down the coal mines. I remember him talking about the ponies that they used to work underground with, which helped them to recover the coal from the pits. He said that when the ponies retired, the miners would save them the crust of their sandwiches, and when they finished their shift underground, they would take them to the ponies which lived around the mouth of the pits, because they'd worked together for so many years and they knew each other so well. I remember it like it was yesterday. And on this journey of trying to understand resources and materials and energy, I went to the World Coal Association. And there in the middle of the homepage, it said we have about 118 years of coal left. And I'd been to many web pages, I'd read many reports, I'd spoken to many experts about 40 years of oil in its conventional form. I'd looked at lots of figures. And 118 years struck me as well outside my lifetime. But when I did the maths, I realised that my great-grandfather was born exactly 118 years before that year. And I sat on his knee till I was 11 years old. And it's nothing. It's absolutely nothing in time. And it made me realise how reliant we are on not only this coal but these other materials. And it actually made me make the decision I never thought I would make. And that was to leave the sport of solo sailing behind me and focus on a much greater challenge, how our future economy could function. And it wasn't just the energy, it was also those materials I mentioned. The 2008 New Scientist report looking at global materials, how many years do we have left? 13 years of indium in every LCD screen, currently not recycled anywhere. Copper, 61, uranium, 59, zinc, tin, about 40 years. Really short time spans, and that's at current consumption. But we know ultimately we're using these materials faster and faster. Global use of these materials is increasing quickly. We have an increase in global population, and the line gets steeper. But one thing we know for sure, that line can't go vertical, because it's based on resources which are finite, resources which we only have once in the history of humanity. The population of the world is increasing by a city the size of London every 38 days. And we're seeing that for 100 years our basic commodity prices fell. Food got cheaper, still fairly cheap today. It fell and fell and fell until 2002, and then there was an inflection point when suddenly those commodities started to get more expensive. Now we're seeing foods getting more expensive. Many of these basic things that we've seen for 100 years getting cheaper, they're not any longer. They're getting expensive quickly, but they're also becoming more and more volatile, which is almost a bigger threat to industries such as automobile manufacturing. Between January 2011 and January 2012, the average European car manufacturer saw an increase in raw material costs of 500 million euros. Half their operating profits wiped away, which ultimately gets passed on to us as the consumer of those vehicles. It made me think, how can the global economy function in the future? What are the solutions? If you're a car manufacturer, what would you do? Is the solution, as so many people were saying, to look at our production lines, to say, what we're going to do is we're going to make these vehicles using 5% less energy. We'll use 5% less energy, we use 5% less material. And then you think, well, what happens 10 years down the road? What happens 20 years down the road? Because although that buys you time, which is absolutely essential in the transition, it buys you time in the transition to what? What was the goal? Where are we trying to head? In 20 years, you're making no vehicles with no employees and no energy. If 10% is reduced, 5% is reduced every year. To me, that wasn't that goal. It wasn't that place that I was aiming for as that 4-year-old girl, that aim of sailing around the world. And I realised, our economy is predominantly a linear one. It's based on taking something out of the ground, making something out of it, and ultimately it gets thrown away. Take a washing machine. Manufacturers make money when they sell them. If they stop selling machines, they make no more money. Those machines ultimately, at some stage, have to break because they need to sell you another one. And every time they sell you a washing machine, they need new raw materials to make that machine from. It's a linear economy which is pushing through. And then I met people who saw things in a very different way. And I started to see there was a different way of looking at how the global economy could function. Michael Braungart, a German chemist, the Welsh education expert Ken Webster, Walter Stahel, who'd done a huge amount of work on the performance economy back in the days that I was being born. 1976, he wrote a paper on this. There were other experts who'd done so much work in this space, but looking at the economy in a very, very different way. How can this function? The CEO of this company actually really opened my eyes because he makes industrial carpet tiles. And he'd said to his workforce, his whole company, he didn't say our goal is to make a carpet tile using a bit less material. He said, I want to design our carpet tiles to be designed for disassembly. I want to be able to recover them. In fact, I'd rather not sell them. I'd rather lease them because I want them to come back to our factory. I want to be able to design them so we can separate the yarn from the base. I want to melt down the base and turn it into the base of the next carpet. I want the yarn to get depolymerized, repolymerized and turned into the yarn of the next carpet. And I want to do that using entirely renewable energy by 2025. Suddenly, he had a business model that would work as well this year as it would in 1,000 years. It was a totally different way of looking at how his business functions. His name was Steph Panando. And then you realise it's not just cars and carpets that you could design for disassembly so you can recover the materials, but how about the biological cycle? How about all this? This is currently waste. You see that as a pile of rubbish, but actually that is absolutely jam-packed full of value. That has real value in fertiliser. It has real value in energy. It has real value in heat. But currently, we don't design to recover all that, and that's just food waste from our homes. How about manufacturing waste? How about human waste, effluent from our houses? How about farm waste? Can we collect this and put this through another cycle, not designed for disassembly by like a carpet or a car, but designed so that the quality of that material can be maintained at its highest value at all times, in a way very similar to the carpet, but looking at the biological cycle. And that was a different way of looking at the economy. To me, suddenly this was a circular economy. It was an economy which could function in the long term. An economy whereby that value of materials, components and products was maintained at its highest value at all times. You can keep that economy flowing in the long run. And you could characterise it as having those two sides, the technical side, the biological side. But it's not just the design of the products, so you can recover materials, components, the products. It's also the business models within which they sit. Should we buy washing machines, or should we pay per wash? How do the economics stack up? How does this function? I was full of questions. How do we take this to the next level? But what I felt at this moment was the same feeling I felt as that 4-year-old girl. I could see a place to get to. I could see a goal. I could see something that could function in the long term. We're not there now. It's a huge distance to travel to get to that point, but it's a goal. It's the same goal that it was for me as sailing around the world as a kid. I had no idea how I could make that happen. But with that goal, you can make steps towards the destination. And so in September 2010, we launched the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. We raised £6 million from the private sector, from companies, by talking about a circular economy model as being an alternative to our linear one. We launched to work in 3 areas. We still work in 3 areas. We work with business, we work in education, both 14 to 19 and international education through university networks and executive education. And the third area we work in is insight, putting together economic papers, case studies, documents to help the transition happen at a faster and faster speed. We're a charity, we make no money. We're set up to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. So to go back to insight, I'll talk you through those 3 areas. 6 months after we launched the foundation, we went to the management consultants McKinsey, because we wanted to try and put a value on this different economy. There'd been a huge amount of fantastic work done in this space, but what was it worth to the economy? Was the circular economy something that would be lucrative this year, 5 years' time, 10 years' time? What were the economics? And we asked McKinsey 3 questions. Initially, in the first year, on the technical cycle, so we looked at manufactured goods within the European Union, i.e. products which cycle in more than 1 year, but less than 10. And in that first report, the one on the right, we asked 3 questions. Does the circular economy decouple growth from resource constraints? Does the circular economy work for business? Is it profitable for business? And is the circular economy good for the economy, the broader economy at large? And to answer those 3 questions, does it decouple growth from resource constraints? We took actually 5 products. We took a mobile phone, a smartphone, a light commercial vehicle, a washing machine, and cotton. And we took those 5 different topics because actually we thought that a mobile phone and a smartphone wouldn't work. We wanted to really challenge the model because they cycle fairly quickly. And we looked at small design tweaks. We looked at 3 scenarios: the status quo today, the transition scenario, and then the advanced scenario by 2025. So fairly short timescales. And we asked what was possible, and we looked at status quo on the left, unaccounted and goes to landfill, 85%. If you made some design tweaks, if you could resell, remanufacture, decomponentise products, which is not beyond us, this is advanced scenario without needing any legislation to change, we could shift unaccounted going to landfill from 85 to 50. And when we panned that out through those other products like the light commercial vehicle, the washing machine, and also the smartphone, we saw that the demand, i.e. the business as usual, for those materials shifts significantly when you shift towards a circular economy. So the top line becomes the bottom line, and your consumption of those materials from raw materials decreases. So we believe that the answer to number 1, does the circular economy decouple growth from resource constraints, was yes, and this was the early stages of the transition scenario. Number 2, is the circular economy good for business? We took those 5 subjects that I mentioned, the 5 products, and I'll just run through 2. We looked, the first one was the light commercial vehicle. So we took a light commercial vehicle of today, not designed in any other way, and the manufacturer buys back that vehicle once it's done 100,000 miles. They then remanufacture it, changing the engine, the drivetrain, the gearbox, the tyres. They would be able to resell that vehicle with the same warranty as a new vehicle, apparently looking like a new vehicle because it's been remanufactured, for half the cost of a new vehicle and make 3 times the profit. They're no longer tied to buying those new raw materials every time because they're buying a vehicle they can remanufacture. That's the early stages. So yes, it was economically viable to shift towards this in that case, and it was, for us as the user, it was half the cost. And that's in the current buying model. That's where we actually physically buy the vehicle. This isn't a lease model. So it did stack up. The other one, the washing machine. We looked at a current washing machine of high quality and one of basic quality that most of us have in our houses. We found that the basic quality machine was designed to do about 2,000 washes. It's cheaper. The high quality machine, more expensive to buy, is designed to do 10,000 washes. When we broke that down, it cost 27 cents a wash for the low quality machine, but only 12 cents a wash over the life of the machine for the high quality machine. Now, in a circular economy, the business model would ideally shift, so we wouldn't have to pay for the machine up front. I mean, when I buy a machine, I buy the machine because I need my washing done. When it breaks, I don't keep it. I don't take it all apart, recover the materials and put them in the garage. I don't want it when it's broken. It goes. So actually, what I really need is just the washes. Now, if we shifted from a buying the machine to a pay-per-wash scenario, everybody could have access to a high-quality machine for only 12 cents a wash. And the manufacturer would then have a flow of materials going back to their company, so they could get the machines back, they could be able to remanufacture the machines, but also recover the materials. And if it stays in your house, they'll be able to repair the machine, upgrade the machine. And there are many companies out there doing this kind of process already, so it's entirely possible. So we get a better deal, we get a better product, we have a better relationship with the manufacturer because it doesn't break after 3 years and we don't have to buy another one. It shifts the model, but the economics, very importantly, stack up. The value lies in the inner circle. So yes, getting to the outer circle, the circle whereby you take the machine apart and you recover the materials, that is economically viable. But the most value lies on the inner circle, where you can remanufacture the same machine, where you can take the components out of the same machine. The circles go out where you get to the raw materials. So the more you can remanufacture, the more you can change the model, the more you can upgrade. That's where the highest value lies. But it is still economically viable to recover those materials and put them back into the system. So if you could do several inner loops, as you can see at the top right, then recover the materials and go to the outer loops and then go back into the inner loops with your next model, would be the ideal scenario. You can cascade materials through industries. One of the examples was cotton. Cotton, initially when it's produced, could be made into a t-shirt or a pair of jeans, but then that could become stuffing or insulation, and then maybe that could become seat padding. And then maybe after seat padding it gets anaerobically digested to create heat, energy and fertiliser. So multiple uses of a product going through the economy. And then finally, non-toxicity. If you mix materials so you can't separate, well, A, biological and technical, but also if there are pollutants in there, such as toxins going into the biological cycle, such as our packaging or food waste or the anaerobic digestion cycle, that's a problem. So being able to reduce toxicity and separate items is very important. And then question number 3, the global economy. Is it good for the, in fact, sorry, this was the EU economy. Is this good for the EU economy? We felt that actually overall the circular economy would improve employment levels, maybe decrease in the primary sector, but increase in the secondary and tertiary sectors. More servicing, more remanufacture. You know, if you sent that washing machine to the scrapyard, that would employ far less people than if that washing machine was being repaired, remanufactured, refurbished, and then going back into someone's home. And then the top line figure for the EU economy was $630 billion per annum, and that was only based on that subset of 48.7% of manufacturing products that cycle in more than 1 year and less than 10, and that was only based on cycling the components, products or materials once per annum of 25%. So this was not your hard-hitting, total, everything possible scenario. This was what's possible through to the advanced scenario of 2025. And then the last report that we did, which was brought out in January this year, was based on consumer goods. So based on products that cycle in less than 1 year. This stuff where the value has been lost. All the value in all those products and materials disappears at that point because it's gone to landfill. And we looked at what if you could take textiles, so in the form of apparel, packaging, food waste, and also beverages. We looked at, that's 80% of the consumer goods sector by value. Actually, only 20% of that 3.2 trillion economy, which is the consumer goods economy, is actually recovered. 20%.